Economics of EOS. Before we start, I would just like to say that I know that there's the word economics here, but actually, this is a really interesting topic because it's about EOS. And to me, EOS represents the catalyst to brand new business models that we've not even begun to see yet. So, I find this very interesting, and hopefully you will too. So essentially, DPoS economics. It will be helpful to understand this before we get into more technical videos, because it gives us really great context of how things work from quite an abstract hierarchical point of view. Essentially, 5% inflation is the driving force behind the economics of EOS. It is this 5% that will be responsible for essentially everything that needs to be built out, from infrastructure to incentivizing parties to do good for the network. So the question really is, how is this split? And ultimately, it is controlled by the community. So you can vote when the network is live what you would like inflation to be. However, inflation has a hard cap of 5%. It can be voted to bring it down, but it can most definitely not go up. It is essentially a hard cap on 5% inflation being the maximum. So, again, what is the allocation of the 5% inflation? Because that's really what matters, and this is going to be pinnacle to the network's success or not. So, we can account 4% of this initial inflation, although it's subject to change. Initially being 4% will go to worker proposals. So let's take a quick summary of worker proposals. Although the outline at this stage is vague, we can definitely draw some conclusions. And if you want more information on worker proposals, take a look at the sources below. So when block rewards become active, 4% inflation will accumulate in saving funds for worker proposals. Worker proposals, however, may not be active upon the network launch because it's a work in progress. I'm hopeful, who knows, I'm hopeful that it could be in the release, but we will see. How much? Well, the worker proposal, the amount of capital it will be allocated, we could take an example and we could say if EOS is at a $20 billion market cap, then 4% of $20 billion is $800 million worth. And that essentially, assuming a constant price of, well, a constant market cap of $20 billion, $800 million worth a year of worker proposal capital, which is an immense amount of money, all for worker proposals, could create unbelievable benefits. Although it sounds like a lot, 4% of the whole network for worker proposals, I still feel that 5% inflation, although it will add up over a number of years, or decades rather, I still feel that it's reasonable. Personally, I won't be voting it down, but that would be your decision as the community. So what is it used for exactly? What is a worker proposal? Well, token holders decide which proposals are going to receive funding by voting, and it's on a per vote basis, which will decide which proposals receive funding and which do not. It's democratic, essentially. So you could definitely use Dash as a great example. Proposals will be designed to benefit the EOS network by building software, opening up real-world gateways, and even promoting the EOS network via advertising. There's a million more examples. It's pretty much anything you could think of could be a worker proposal, assuming that it benefits the network. So that's what worker proposals are. A very broad summary, I appreciate that, but it's early days and 4% is allocated to that. So that leaves us with 1%, but where would that 1% go? So presumably we would need incentivization, financial incentive for block producers. Block producers being the equivalent of miners in proof of work or forgers in proof of stake. They're going to be the people that run the network. Now, the problem is there's going to be 21 active producers and many standby delegates. So how do you work it out so it's fair? Well, the first step is we know that there's 1% left of the 5 for block producers incentive. Okay, that's definitely a good start, but how exactly does that break down? So this actually covers standby nodes as well as the 21 active producers, although we're not sure how yet. Financial incentivizes the producers to maintain appropriate hardware. You want the 21 nodes, 21 producers, to have the best hardware, presumably because they will be running the network on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, you want the standby nodes to have adequate hardware to jump in and fill in for anyone that gets voted out or drops out for whatever circumstances. So sufficient incentive to remain honest in order to keep profitable positions. So they have to make profit and it has to be worth their while. But we need to figure it out, how that's going to be divided, that 1% inflation. So essentially, the 21 producers, and it's in red because it's only the 21 producers, will essentially receive 0.25 block reward. And that is on a per block basis. So they have to remain active. And again, it is only for the top 21. So they have to be voted in as the top 21 to get block rewards. If you're the top 22, then you're not going to receive this at all. 0. So standby nodes essentially are omitted from receiving any of this. They get none of the block reward. So it's proportionate to the number of blocks each one produces, once again, and that obviously incentivizes them to be producing blocks and to be active as they possibly can, because otherwise they don't receive this reward, and of course they would simply be voted out, is the theory. So we know there's 5% inflation. We know where 4% goes, worker proposals. 1% goes to incentivization. The 21 producers receive 0.25 block reward. Okay, so where is the other 0.75, and how does this incentivize the standby nodes? And also, if we had 0.75 just for standby nodes, then what's the incentive to be a top 21 block producer, because you could earn more being a standby node? Well, not quite. It's a vote reward, and this reward is not exclusive, conversely to the 21 producers who only get the 0.5. It's exclusive to them. The 0.75 vote reward is not exclusive to the standby nodes. Instead, this vote reward is for the 21 active block producers and 178 delegates, standby delegates, to run full nodes. Now this was some interesting math that was in Dan's Medium post about the latest release, and basically it took a market cap as an example, and it worked out that basically with this vote reward split between everybody, standby and active producers, that you could support the 21 active producers with just the vote reward, and you could support 178 standby nodes, assuming everyone got equal votes. So that gives you an idea of how much money is allocated that can keep everybody running. And I highlight full nodes because 178 standby nodes running full nodes is a lot more decentralized and a lot of fallback if anything goes wrong, and it will presumably deliver them enough incentive to keep these full nodes running continuously, which is fantastic. This makes it realistic for standby nodes to quickly secure the network if any of the top 21 drop out. In theory, a wealthy individual could game the system. Essentially, they could stake so much capital in the form of EOS tokens that they could then run for block producer as a standby node and then vote for themselves, even if they have no intention of producing blocks or buying or maintaining hardware for a full node or any node whatsoever. So that's a problem, but the question is, how do we prevent this? Because otherwise we've kind of got a backdoor to a proof of stake model where you can vote for yourself and receive a stake, and of course it's the token holders that vote, and if it's your tokens voting for you, then that could be quite hard to undo because you're giving yourself positive votes. So the answer, which has been proposed, producers can only claim their per vote reward once per day. However, to make this claim, their share must be a minimum of 100 EOS tokens per day. So they have to qualify to receive 100 EOS tokens as a vote reward a day, which of course they would have to stake a ridiculous amount of tokens to be able to receive that in order to qualify. Otherwise they receive 0. This way the kind of wealth needed would be greater than any one individual in theory, and requires them to run a transparent and serious campaign, because you're going to need votes from third parties, because the presumption is in general no individual can afford to do that. They'd have to stake so many tokens, and if you vote for yourself, it's okay because you're going to receive 0 because you won't qualify for the 100 vote rewards a day, and it's obviously proportionate to the number of votes you have. So you'd have to run in a serious and transparent way, being you'd have to gather votes from the community, and presumably they would want some kind of detail about you and transparency. Otherwise you're not going to get the votes in theory. That is of course theory, but we'll stick with that for now. Okay, so to summarize the economics of EOS, again from quite a high level abstracted point of view: 5% inflation, 4% for worker proposals, 1% for block producers incentive, which is split 2 ways. 21 producers get 0.25 of the block reward, and it's only for the block producers. And then finally the 0.75 vote reward is divided between all of the standby nodes and the block producers. Earlier we used the example that perhaps the block producers and standby nodes, if they had equal, we looked at the kind of numbers like 178 standby nodes, and obviously the 21 producers could all run off of that. But in reality, that's not what's going to happen. Of course, to get voted into the top 21 producers actively producing blocks receiving 0.25 block reward, you'll have so many more votes than the standby nodes, because you would have had to receive huge numbers of votes. So it also works out quite democratically, because if you have somebody in the top 21 block producers who received just the bare minimum amount of votes to get in there, but then you receive someone else who, like, the whole community was behind, well, it's surely only fair that the delegate that the whole community was behind would receive greater reward, and presumably they would offer greater benefit to the network as a whole. And on a side note, rather than having, you know, like 4% inflation for the producers to go and do good and build out the network, I do like the idea of worker proposals where the community can decide for itself. And of course, you would like to think with this kind of reward that it would still be sufficient for block producers to do good for the network with projects, whatever they may be, that will grow the EOS network in all directions, because they should still get enough profit from this to do so. And of course, they're trying to procure themselves votes. It's not very often you hear a Bitcoin miner come out and say, we're going to do un Duntoir project for Bitcoin to try and improve it and create mainstream adoption, and we're going to spend millions. That doesn't happen because they have no incentive to do so, because they're not in an election where they're essentially trying to gain good favor with the network, understandably. So that's it for the economics of EOS. I really look forward to going into details when it comes to apps and how they work and how the voting works and how the delegation of bandwidth, RAM, etc. is going to be allocated. I left that out of the economics video purely because I feel like that's more of a technical side, although you could argue otherwise, but we'll do that in a later video. So up next, we're going to take a look at the DPoS consensus algorithm, and we're going to do it in a way that kind of works back on itself. So we're really going to see how DPoS has improved on POS and how POW has improved on POS, etc. Sorry, the opposite being true. So just how each one has improved on each other, and eventually seeing how we arrived at delegated proof of stake instead of just proof of stake and proof of work, etc. So I have been away for a little while because I've been building some trading software for people's portfolios. They can run it on their desktops, and it took so much longer than I was expecting, and it was just as I started the first EOS video, being about 4 weeks ago now, which is crazy. So I am committed to making these videos, and I'm actually freed up now, so I'll be doing this hopefully every week. At least a video every week is my goal. If I don't do that, then you can have a go at me in the comments by all means. And yeah, until next time, all the best.